Welcome to episode 26 of Cyclops is Waiting For Me, an X-Men the Animated Series weekly recap podcast. I'm Rod. I said podcast. Anyway, I'm Rod. Look me up on social media. It's either Rod Kim or Rod Kim Rocks.
And I'm JC. Cyclops is Waiting For Me is our weekly podcast series where I forget to give my own intro, and we go back and watch every single episode of the original 1992 X-Men the Animated Series in their original intended script order, building up to the release of X-Men 97, which is coming to Disney Plus in 2023. Wanted to add, for those of you who are wondering how we determine the order of the episodes, we utilize a list that was provided in previously on X-Men, the Making of an Animated Series by the lead showrunner, Eric Lewald, which is also available for reference on Wikipedia. And strangely enough, this episode in particular, that plays a huge factor, which we'll get into in just a second.
Yeah, this was probably the first set of recordings that I actually had to studiously reference the spreadsheet that John had for us.
It's a solid spreadsheet.
It is. Some quick reminders. We're a recap show about a series that came out over 26 years ago. There will be spoilers. If you don't want it spoiled for you, pause the podcast, watch the episode, and come back. We'll do our best to avoid mentioning anything about future episodes we haven't covered yet. We're currently not sponsored or affiliated with Disney or Disney Plus in any way, and I don't know if we want to be at this point. This was a chore getting the episode orders right.
Yeah, we kind of talked a little bit of shit about that. Don't forget to follow us on all your social media at Cyclops IWFM Pod on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. And of course, make sure to follow us on your favorite podcast services. Finally, we record these episodes in batches, and we are way ahead of schedule because June and July are nightmares for Rod and I. So we're probably not even going to react to any news for the next few episodes because it will just be so out of date. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, because I think actually the episode that posted this week was Mojo Vision, right?
Yes.
And we're recording the next appearance of Mojo.
Yes, we are.
Not today, but in the one we're recording today. Anyway, now on to the show.
That won't be confusing, Rod.
Today we're going to be talking about Season 3, Episode 8, titled No Mutant is an Island. It aired on September 21st, 1996, and currently sits at a 6.8 star rating on IMDb. Oh, poor baby.
I triple checked that. That is an accurate star rating, referencing the Mojo Vision episode.
This episode actually aired 2 years later than our previous episode because of animation challenges and was originally considered a part of Season 5 of the show based on broadcast order. Okay, so that explains my first note for this is I don't remember watching this.
No, and I'm pretty sure by the time Season 5 had come out, I had fallen off of watching it on a regular basis. There are also, interestingly enough, two different versions of the episode that exist, supposedly. The animation quality change. The first one was from Philippines Animation Studio. That's the actual name. That is not just a descriptor. And then the second from ACOM or AKOM. I don't know which one it is, but apparently this episode was animated twice.
Oh, completely different.
Supposedly. Wow. I don't have the visual reference on it, but that's what is being reported, at least on Wikipedia. And we know how accurate it is on Wikipedia.
Based on the version that we saw on Disney Plus, I think we saw the alternate studio.
I do too. I think the second version, and we'll jumping right into it, we see for the first time in original script order, the new intro. Which the new intro didn't happen until later on.
Yeah, because it cuts out the lineup thing that they're running at each other.
Yeah, there's clips from different episodes are in there. The lineup at the end isn't there anymore. It's like a weird remixed version of the song.
That was actually I stopped it to listen to it again, make sure I wasn't just hallucinating. And it's weird. I think what might be going on is there's a more pronounced electric guitar. I want to say it's been a long day. We've only been recording for 3 minutes. There might be other things going on. So I actually texted Ron. I was like, I'm re-watching the show and things kind of get weird in the middle of Season 3. Maybe I should specify this is actually Season 5, kind of. And he didn't know. But to his credit, he did text me back in the middle of his son's graduation. So he said he was going to listen later and see if he noticed something or if he had anything to do with it, or maybe they did something without him, which would not be unheard of for Saban.
I mean, I know we're an audio podcast, but just to let you know, the second that Rod just said, well, he texted me back during his son's graduation, I just buried my face in my hands because we were just bothering Ron Wasserman so much for this stupid show.
Well, so it's funny. So for me, I have to remember this about other people, especially now that the world has kind of opened back up again, is when I text someone, and if you're someone who knows me personally, know this about me. If I text you, I don't, unless I specify otherwise, I don't necessarily like expect an immediate response unless you're immediately available. I just figure it's kind of like email. I'm like, I put it out there, and then when you think of it, you get back with me. I just figured like, oh, if this happens to be the day or he's busy or whatever, he'll just get back to me when he does, is whatever. I didn't expect him to be like, well, I'm heading to this graduation. I was like,
okay, at least it was fine. Like headed to the graduation and not like his phone starts buzzing as his kid is getting the diploma.
Right. Or he was being polite and that was what's happening. I don't know.
Yeah.
But so there isn't like a really obvious story there just yet. It definitely caught me off guard. And I actually went back to check the other episodes, make sure I just didn't miss it. And
this was the first time. Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, now onto the actual story.
Yeah, onto the episode.
This makes so much more sense now because as a kid, not that I missed it necessarily because, you're just watching from week to week, but watching all the episodes, they're mourning Jean's loss. And I don't ever remember them doing that before.
No.
And so this makes so much sense.
Right. Yeah, this is the episode where that initial mourning takes place. And then obviously at the end of the episode, we'll get to the part of why there's not more mourning being mentioned. But yeah, this was the time where everybody got to reflect on the loss of Jean. And, it starts out with Beast, who's reading poetry, and then Jubilee losing her shit. She cannot handle the scenario.
Yeah, she basically just says it's kind of fucked up that we're just accepting that she's gone,
Yeah, she says this whole thing is sick, and Rogue tries to comfort her, and it doesn't work. She is not handling it. I think it's because it's one of those like you didn't see the body scenarios.
Yeah.
And also Jubilee wasn't even in space. Jubilee was left back on Earth when all that was happening.
Yeah, so her whole perspective was she saw the sun fade in and out, but pretty much the rest of it was just waiting and then a ship coming back without Jean.
Right.
Or I guess there was that little interaction with Jean came back for a second and then left, but
right, but it's a little different than when you're
there,
thousands of miles, hundreds of thousands of miles away and such,
And then obviously Scott is very upset. He actually leaves they're outside of the mansion having a little memorial poetry reading, and Scott he gets up and leaves, and he feels inside what Jubilee said out loud. You can just tell by the way he kind of fucks off. And we catch up with him in the war room. There's like a projection or something.
Like a hologram of her.
Of Jean, and on the Cerebro, I guess. And he's trying to mourn. Professor Xavier does not take social cues, I guess, for a mind reader. That's really interesting. So he goes in, he's just trying to offer advice when he just needs to let this man grieve. He's trying to tell him to, not feel as bad or whatever, and that always goes over well. Yeah,
saying it'll be okay to somebody who just lost their sort of wife before they got to get remarried. Yeah, and Scott loses it. He's like, I'm sick of it. I'm sick of being den mother to a bunch of quibbling children. Basically, I'm sick of carrying this burden that you put on me by putting me as leader of this team. And he throws his uniform down.
Yeah, he turns his uniform in. And I like that he says something here about not seeing a point in saving a prejudiced world. I was like, kind of get it. You keep fighting and then nothing really changes if you think about it. They've been fighting for 3.5 seasons at this point?
2.5 at this point.
2.5 seasons at this point. And how many years for them?
Right. Well, if you look at it from the perspective of Scott was the first member of the team.
Yeah, as a teenager.
Yeah. And they're portrayed as being early to mid 20s. So we can assume Scott is somewhere in the neighborhood of 25, 26 years old.
Yeah.
So he's been doing this for literally half of his life at this point.
Yeah. What's interesting about Scott quitting the X-Men at that time kind of gave me the same vibes that a lot of people who are deconstructing the Christian faith right now are giving. Is they're, at least to them in their perspective, they're seeing stuff not pan out the way that they were promised in their life. And so that's kind of what I see in Scott. He's like, you told me if I just did this, and that's why he was always a Boy Scout the whole time. And he's like, it's not panning out. And I just lost Jean, and that was the last straw, And so for all the shit that they give Scott throughout this whole series, despite our podcast being named after him, I actually relate with him at this point, or feel for him. It's just yeah, I get it, man. You lost everything.
Yeah, and I mean, he had taken on Xavier's mission and was wearing it on his sleeve as much as Charles did. It's half of his life has been dedicated to this dream, and all this dream in his mind has cost him his suffering, and nothing else has changed.
Yeah, and now he's nothing, at least to him. And so we see him on a bus, presumably out of town. It's going somewhere, And while he's on the bus, he has a flashback of his proposal to Jean, the one we saw in a previous episode. And it gets interrupted by a kid shooting like a toy laser gun at him. And he says, "Die, mutant," or something like that.
Yeah, the little kid decides to like be pointing a gun at his head. And it's obviously like space laser gun. It doesn't look like a real gun or anything like that. But he's yelling, "Die, mutant." His mom yells at him and she's like, "No." She's like, don't do that. He's like, "But I'm only playing good guys and mutants." And it's like,
oof, yeah.
Still, like even just cops and robbers back in the day, you don't go point a fake gun at somebody's head.
Yeah.
Like even in the 80s and 90s, we knew not to do that shit.
But even that just dichotomy, you could see it on Scott's face. And you could see it was a purposeful animation choice to see his reaction when he said good guys versus mutants. And it was like, oh
yeah. No doubt on that one. It was the like, is Scott going to like snap on this kid? Because we've already established like he's hit his breaking point. He literally just gave up not even being the leader, but being even a member of the X-Men.
Yeah. And so when the bus arrives at its destination, Scott walks up to what we see as McNeil Orphanage. He has a flashback to presumably his early teen years when his powers manifested in the middle of the orphanage. All the other kids there make fun of him. And you start seeing a little bit of that trauma, but that gets interrupted by a woman who walks out of the orphanage. They take a beat, but then they remember each other. Her name is Sarah.
Well, she asks him what he's doing there. And
which is a good question for...
Yeah, it's a fair question because he also arrives like towards the evening. So it's a really awkward time to show up at an orphanage. And she's like, "Oh, are you like looking to adopt somebody?" He's like, "No, I've like kind of know this place." And then they get that beat of like, "Oh, we recognize each other, but we haven't seen each other in about 15 years probably."
And they have a quick exchange where you figure out that she was also an orphan at the orphanage, but she came back to volunteer or work there or something.
Yeah, she brings Scott inside and they start talking, and she reveals that she had a husband and unfortunately her husband passed away. So when that happened, she kind of saw it as her calling to go back to the orphanage and kind of take over, to help give a better experience for kids than, maybe what she was experiencing when she was there.
Yeah. And then that's when Scott reveals to her that, because she asked if he ever got married. And it's really interesting that this solidified whatever we thought was happening. He says, "No, but I had someone." I was like, so he's still in his mind that him and Jean weren't married.
Well, unless Morph.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one, there's is it a church marriage or is it the state marriage? And then did they go and get the marriage certificate or like, so maybe they just didn't go get the marriage certificate, Rod.
Yeah.
They thought they were going to do that after the honeymoon.
I guess.
And then because there wasn't a proper officiant, I don't know.
Something, yeah. It's 90s cartoon logic.
So luckily that is interrupted by a TV reporter mentioning Zebediah Kilgrave.
Yeah, it took me a minute, like a couple more scenes to realize who Kilgrave was. I do know him from Jessica Jones lore as the Purple Man.
That is correct.
I do not remember him in the X-Men series, so I'm assuming this is his only appearance.
I did not look it up, but I would not be surprised, especially because this didn't air until the 5th season broadcast order. So,
or if he was in a season, it was the 5th season, because that's the one I probably didn't see any of.
Right.
And this is one of those weird things where it's like, it wasn't the 5th season.
Interesting thing for me is, so obviously we've said he is the Purple Man.
Yeah.
He's never called the Purple Man in the episode. And what is important that we'll get to a little bit later on is he's not a mutant in the comics. His power came from like a chemical spill kind of scenario.
Okay.
Not born with the powers the way that it is implied in this episode.
I guess that makes sense of how like the MCU was able to use him in the Netflix shows or something.
Right, because the rule was always around the mutants.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Sarah tells Scott about how Kilgrave is essentially keeping the orphanage alive, both by funding it pretty much and also adopting what she calls the special.
So there's been scholarships to the disadvantaged kids, at least 10 of them. And then it was money and adopting 4 of the special kids.
Yeah.
And they have like that awkward moment of like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, and she's like, yeah, mutants, Scott. I'm talking about mutants.
And so Scott has a flashback to when he was up for adoption and then rejected. And it looked like there was a little bit of like a mishap because it was when his powers were new.
Yeah, something happened where his powers went off and, he wasn't constantly shooting optic blasts. It was kind of an on and off thing at that point because he got back to the orphanage and he's okay. Like he's not shooting stuff out of his eyes, but something obviously happened, and he basically gave like, I didn't mean to do it.
This kind of portrayed it to me like when your voice starts cracking when you're that age. It's like, it's not all the time,
right?
At the worst times, it decides to happen. So that there's just a note, if you haven't noticed already, a lot of these flashbacks get interrupted constantly. So this flashback gets interrupted by some smoke coming down the hallway, a fire alarm going off. And so Sarah runs upstairs and evacuates all the kids while Scott puts the fire out. And this actually exhibits something that I learned from John and Wally a few episodes ago about how Scott doesn't shoot lasers, he shoots a force. And so he's able to put the fire out with his optic blast, which, that changed my like conception of his powers completely.
Because you always thought it was like laser beam, like laser is hot, laser lights shit on fire.
Like Superman lasers, or something. And so he starts putting the fire out. He finds a kid running around up there hiding and assumes that he was like playing with matches or something, and starts kind of accusing him because Cyclops is yelling. His other superpower is yelling at people.
He's really good at it, though. Jumping to conclusions is a hell of a superpower.
Yeah. So to mitigate this, Sarah goes up and kind of clears up the situation. She says that Rusty's one of the special kids and that he has fire powers, and Rusty shows like his hands, light up and stuff. And then Rusty says he doesn't want to go back to Kilgrave, so I'm going to, we're assuming that he was one of the kids that was adopted by Kilgrave. And so Cyclops, figures, well, I relate to this kid, and goes on a walk.
I've literally gone through this scenario of having powers pop up at an inconvenient time. Yeah.
And so he decides to go on a walk with him. I don't know where, apparently a shady neighborhood.
I think the orphanage is unfortunately just in a rundown neighborhood, because they're not that far from the orphanage. And Scott is talking to Rusty, and Rusty's like, what are you, some kind of like special caseworker kind of thing? And he looks around, and then he just decides to shoot a building. Yeah. It's like, oh, I hope that doesn't have people squatting in it, Scott.
Yeah. Or anybody would notice you just blew up a building in the middle of the night. And so Rusty's like, oh, cool, you're a mutant too. And I know if you're someone or a kid now, you're like, well, you probably noticed that the grown man wearing like crimson sunglasses in the middle of the night. But this was the 90s, and that was not uncommon. There were times that was just a fashion choice. There's literally a song from that time period, or maybe the 80s.
That was the 80s.
I wear my sunglasses at night.
Yeah, that was the 80s.
And that carried over into the 90s, like the early 90s too. So it wasn't too far off. It threw, no pun intended, today's lens. That seems weird.
I hate you.
I didn't mean to do that, but
it's worse because you said no pun intended. When you say no pun intended, and that's what draws my attention to it.
Okay.
I just want to point that out.
But looking in the context is better of the.
No, you already said it. Just own it.
Of the early 90s. Through the lens of the early 90s is not that out of, because I forgot at that point. We all know that he's Cyclops, but these kids and stuff, don't necessarily know.
Right, because when Cyclops was yelling at Rusty, he wasn't using his powers at that point. So Rusty wouldn't have seen the blast coming out.
So Rusty tells Scott that Kilgrave is crazy. He's been talking about a torture chamber and what he's going to do with the kids and use them to do stuff.
He wants to run the governor out of office, and that he has, he's going to try to take over the city, essentially. Yeah. They get back to the orphanage, and as that's happening, Rusty is letting both Scott and Sarah know that, and she basically tells him to get back inside. And at that point, the police show up, and there's a limo as well, and that's when we see Kilgrave arrive in person.
Mm-hmm. And Kilgrave kind of is doing that weird like villain thing where he's being nice but like passive aggressive. And so he's like, hey, he loves the children. He's smiling like a weird supervillain. And he kind of passive aggressively threatens Sarah in the orphanage by saying he's going to, it'd be a shame if funding got cut and all this stuff.
I very much got an Elon Musk vibe out of him as that whole scene was going on.
I didn't even think about that, but
like even the way the dude's like jaw is shaped and stuff like that, I very much got a Musk vibe. And it's like kind of what Musk is at this time. Who knows where it's going to be when this episode airs in July or August or wherever the hell we are on the timeline. But it's just kind of like I want to buy Twitter, but you guys kind of screwed me. And it's like, dude, if you thought there were only 5% bots on Twitter, that's on you. That's not on them.
I think, like a 15-year-old knows that.
Seriously.
Speaking of, if anybody wants to do fan art of Elon Musk as the Purple Man, that'd be funny to put on Twitter. So there's this weird, creepy uncle moment where like Kilgrave goes to hug Rusty.
Yeah, he says that with loving discipline, he's going to make something out of Rusty, and he gives him a hug, and it's like, it's only been a few days, but I love you like a son. And
really creepy.
Yeah, super creepy.
And so Rusty like reluctantly goes with him. I guess he just figures he doesn't have a choice.
He kind of doesn't have a choice. I mean, there are literally cops there.
And then it cuts to being at Kilgrave's place.
This is where you could tell it was a different animation studio because of the quality control on it. The fact that you had this mansion and there are big signs that say private property and keep out. It very much felt like Scooby-Doo villain as opposed to take it seriously X-Men villains. And the fact that this did air during the 5th season kind of fits that narrative.
Yeah, because usually signs like that are like Cassidy Keep or like when it said McNeil Orphanage, it's like very specific things. So I was actually I rewound to watch it again. I was like, oh, that was nothing important.
No, it was kind of tacky, if we're being honest.
And then when we cut to the inside, the first thing we see is Rusty getting strapped down. Not even like with straps, like metal, bearing things or whatever.
It's a little more of a seat than a table, but yeah, I mean, it's still not comfortable. I would agree with you on that.
So he's strapped down, and Kilgrave looks at him, and his eyes start to glow. And this is the first time we see that he's not
a normal human.
Yeah.
Aside from just being a sociopath, we realize that he has powers, and he says something along the lines of like, "Now back to your work."
Yeah. And they pan across the kids, and we know who they are by the end of the episode, so I know that now, but in my notes, I didn't know at the time.
Right.
There was one character that I thought might have been Sunfire because it's like shockingly close in like character design at the end.
Taki?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because of his outfit and stuff. I don't know. It looked like it. And I was debating it because I know this was supposed to be kids. And I was like, I didn't think Sunfire was a kid.
No, Shiro is definitely like closer to the age of like Scott and the other adults. But the 3 kids that we see in particular are Skids, Boom Boom, and Taki. Taki is not referred by his name that he had in the comics. All 4 of them, by the way, Rusty included, in the comics are part of the X Factor trainee group, which was known as the X-Terminators.
There was one girl that wasn't named, correct?
Nope, that was Skids and Boom Boom. They were both named.
Oh, okay. I just missed them in the later animation thing then.
Yeah, and in the comics, Rusty actually goes by Fire Fist. Taki goes by Whiz Kid.
Oh, that's different than Wizard. I'm getting all these Marvel characters.
Yeah, you're confusing shit. Yeah.
Okay.
Gotcha. But the one that stood out to me the most of this group was Boom Boom, because Boom Boom would continue being a more prominent character than these other 3 would. Most of them like did a majority of their stuff in that X-Terminators placement, whereas Boom Boom would later join Cable and X-Force.
Okay.
Yeah.
As kids or like later on?
We shouldn't say kids because they really are teenagers. Yeah. But she's like a younger member of X-Force. Okay. And it's kind of like the weird comic book time frame where it's like somebody is a teenager for like 15 years of real time.
So was Skids the girl with like the 90s sunglasses?
No, that was Boom Boom.
That was Boom Boom. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Boom Boom is probably, now that I know her name, is probably one of the most 90s characters that isn't Jubilee.
Very much so. I would agree with you completely.
There's another one that comes up in another episode that we'll bring up, but as of right now, she's the most 90s. So you see all the kids are being hypnotized, or is that what Kilgrave's powers technically is?
Brainwashing.
Because like he basically controls them. I only know this from Jessica Jones from my previous experience.
But yeah, it's whatever he wants you to do, he can make you do.
So he just kind of puppeteers, I guess, might be like a better like illustration.
Yeah, I do notice like compared to what we see in Jessica Jones and then even just comic book versions of Kilgrave, this is actually like a little bit of a subdued power on him, because he has to actually like brainwash these kids instead of just take control. Because there was a recent arc with Jessica Jones where he literally just turns a block of people on Jessica and Captain Marvel.
Yeah.
So he does it with like no effort.
Yeah.
But these aren't the strongest willed individuals. They are teenagers. So somebody as sophisticated as him from a power perspective, he's not as all powerful as the current Marvel iteration is. Yeah.
And at this point, he also starts turning blue. And somewhere around this point is when I'm realizing, oh, Kilgrave, that's right, Purple Man. And
what color did you say you turned?
Purple, I guess. 90s TV VHS transfer or whatever. Yeah, the blue man turned purple. Anyway, so this is right around the time I realized he was Purple Man, and I would have remembered this if I had watched it. This is what I was pretty certain I hadn't seen this before, because, like you said, his powers could easily have gone so much darker. Like, if you know the Jessica Jones show, you know how dark they go with that.
Of course.
And especially the guy that's so sociopathic. Like,
I mean, even the example I gave from that recent comic arc, he literally had people throwing themselves at Jessica Jones and Ms. Marvel in the most violent ways possible, because it's like, well, you could either stop me or these people are going to kill themselves trying to fight you.
Yeah. So anyway, luckily we have
a toned down
version. He's just trying to kind of like use kids as soldiers. That's not too much better, but that was a thing in the 90s too. Power Rangers is all about kids being weaponized.
That's a different show.
Yeah.
That is a different podcast we will talk about at another time.
So he has the kids recite kind of this mantra, which I did write down. The future is now. We will be respected. We will overcome their hatred. Through strength, we will lead.
But he only said that the second part like once. He had them say the future is now. We will be respected 6 times first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he starts giving his villain monologue about how he wants to make these kids, or just mutants in general, put them in positions of power, like bankers,
future leaders and stuff. Yeah.
And so he sends them to the Capitol building to attack.
To be clear, it is the governor of the state Capitol building, not national capital, just for point of clarity.
And so we see the various powers of the kids. Taki, he literally says, like, use your wheelchair power. Is that his actual power?
Wheelchair transformation power.
Transformation power. Is that directly related to him, or is it like a technology? I don't know. I guess there's like I have a lot of questions about it. Maybe I'm not supposed to ask because it's 90s comic book stuff.
Wow. Aliases. Taki. Asian stereotype boy.
Oh, good. So
this is on Marvel Fandom's database.
So this character ages well, is what we're saying.
Jesus Christ. I'm a mutant like Artie and Leech. I can make my chair take me anywhere, make it do anything, and I'd never have to feel alone again. Okay? Taki first manifested his mutant ability to technoform materials to function to his specifications, even to the point of being contrary to the laws of nature and science.
That's a great excuse for writers to write whatever they want. Although that makes more sense. So he generally just kind of can control like technology, and I'm guessing that since his like wheelchair situation is kind of futuristic, that it's his closest resource.
He is the epitome of a 1988 comic book power.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of shows a little bit of Kilgrave's character too, where he reduces it down to wheelchair transformation power instead of just overall. Like he could have made him like access that building security. Like that's probably been a more useful use of his powers or something.
Right, but you don't get the great visual of the transforming wheelchair. So
that's a good point too, though. Transformers are huge then. So
oh yeah.
So that was probably part of it.
No, the Transformers were on their way out at that point.
Well, for a show that like adults were making, they're probably like, oh, Transformers are huge. They're like literally 5 years behind. Then Skids and Boom Boom. I just saw like just general firepower. Is that
so Skids was kind of like a Johnny Cage slide.
Okay.
It was like her feet were like glowing color as she was sliding through the ground. So literally skidding.
Okay.
Yep. And then Boom Boom kind of could throw like fireballs, but they weren't actually on fire. They were almost like gambit charges, but they bounced almost like rubber balls before they would blow up. And that's pretty accurate to what I know about with Boom Boom from a character perspective.
Plasma blast or something like that.
Yeah, it was like plasma basketballs with a timer on them kind of thing.
Yeah. And then Rusty is kind of like the security to make sure nobody gets in. And he kind of like it's almost like a Carrie moment where like he just summons fire out of nowhere all over the steps,
which is more accurate to the way Rusty's portrayed than what we talked about with the Rogue Origin episode,
Pyro,
where Pyro cannot summon his own fire. Pyro needs something to activate to become his firepower, whereas Rusty could generate it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So all that happens in just a matter of seconds, and Kilgrave,
we took way longer to explain it than it actually happened on screen.
And then Kilgrave goes into the governor's office, and he essentially hypnotizes him and tells him he's going to give in to the Platte River Project.
There, as far as I could tell, there is no significance to what that is. I was literally looking it up because it seemed like a very specific name, but
yeah, they probably just picked it out of something, or maybe it was like a real deep cut comic reference or something.
It may have been, but none of the various sites that I referenced to gather info for this mention it. So we then hop back to the orphanage. Scott, not for nothing, everybody's really chill for the building having been on fire like a couple hours prior.
I guess they have a history of having mutant kids there.
Yeah, they're just used to the building being on fire, I guess.
Some sort of disarray. They're like, oh, Kilgrave will pay for that. He's been chill about this. And so Scott apparently took a nap or something.
Yeah, they make a joke about like, how'd you sleep? And he was like, really uncomfortably.
Yeah. And Sarah's like, fuck you. No, just kidding. Sarah didn't mention that she was listening to Scott. Because he's like, was Gene your partner? Because it's the name you yelled out in your sleep, and he doesn't question it at all. He's like, yeah. I'm like,
well, she goes, who was Jean?
Yeah.
Because you kept saying her name.
So I'm going to chalk that up to he probably slept on the couch in the lobby or something.
Yeah, just the front.
Yeah. So that's fine. So that conversation gets interrupted by the TV, which is another news, the 90s thing that happens is news interrupting stuff.
Oh, yeah, because there are kids who are watching TV and they get annoyed because this...
That's right.
Yeah, the kids are like, oh, this sucks, without saying sucks, and they walk away from the TV.
Because of the bulletin or the emergency thing.
Yeah, it was basically, the governor has resigned due to health reasons.
I remember there being things like that in the news, but I don't ever remember something like a governor resigning being so urgent that they would interrupt TV programming.
90s cartoon.
Okay.
No, you're totally right. Like, yes, in the days of broadcast live TV feeds and stuff, if there was something major, like I remember all TV being interrupted because of the O.J. Simpson chase, for example, but not, well, the governor's sick, so he's resigning. That would be in a commercial of like, oh, tonight on the 11 o'clock news, but it would not interrupt your show. Yeah.
So conveniently, they mentioned that the governor is stepping down or resigning. And they also conveniently say that this is going to, bode well for Kilgrave, who wants to do the power plant thing on the Platte River project.
Yeah, I believe they kind of talk over it a little bit, but you hear him say it's a multi-billion-dollar hydroelectric plant.
Yeah.
So I guess his whole end game is he's just going to build a power plant that will make him richer kind of scenario.
Yeah, or maybe, hide whatever he's doing or something. So Scott says, that sounds a little fishy. Maybe Rusty was telling the truth. So Sarah agrees, and the two of them drive over to Kilgrave's. Inside Kilgrave's place, he's putting on Caucasian makeup.
So did you see the Easter egg that was happening at that point? Before, so Kilgrave walks into this room that's obviously like an office, and he has his full purple face going. There's a dartboard on the wall. On the dartboard, it is a character mostly clad in yellow and has two DDs on his chest.
Oh, is that a Daredevil reference?
It's a Daredevil reference because one of the earliest appearances from Purple Man was in Daredevil. Oh. And if you look back at the original version of Daredevil, his costume was more yellow. Within the first dozen issues, he switched to the now synonymous red costume.
I forgot until just this moment you mentioned that there was a yellow Daredevil.
Yeah, it was a yellow and red mix. But it's a reference, and there's also darts going into the image.
So like a bullseye.
Well, not even a bullseye. It's just this is one of his foes, essentially.
Oh, gotcha.
Right.
So, yeah, he's putting on the makeup, and then Scott comes in. Sarah waits in the car.
She wants to go in, and Scott doesn't let her.
Yeah.
And then Scott kind of just goes up to the door and is demanding to see him. And then I didn't know if this was a joke or a reference, but the dude who works for Kilgrave, his name was Wayne. And I didn't know if that was a dig on Bruce Wayne, that the guy called Wayne who was answering the doors.
Yeah, was the butler.
Yeah.
Interesting. That would have been funny.
I mean, it's probably just a generic name, but that seemed like a possibility.
Yeah. And so Kilgrave shows up to the door too and says, "Oh, come on in, check out everything. It's fine." And all the kids are kind of, at first glance, behaving pretty well, like you would at a prep school or something. And then as you spend more time there, you realize they're all kind of almost like Stepford wives. So
you have Taki playing on the piano. Mm-hmm. You have Skids and Boom Boom who are playing chess, and then Rusty walks in with cookies and offers them to Scott, and Scott not casually puts his hand on Rusty and he's like, "Is everything okay?"
Yeah.
I'm giving you a very loud whisper.
And then Rusty's like, "Yes, I was wrong, everything's great."
And then this is where I question the intelligence of Kilgrave. He gives a signal and Taki runs down Scott. He didn't have a reason to attack him.
Yeah. You could have lured him somewhere if you wanted to trap him, or just send him home. I don't know.
Yeah, it's what are you going to do? And so Scott gets knocked out, which is kind of the biggest bitch way that Scott has gotten knocked out in the show so far, is he just kind of got hit from behind.
Yeah.
And they're like, yep, dump him in the back, which again, questioning the intelligence of Kilgrave as a villain in this scenario. You put the body in your own pool for him to drown. Why put a body in your own pool? That would certainly lead to an investigation of some kind.
And also just trust that he was done.
Wayne's an idiot, okay? I put that on Wayne. Because Wayne should have held him under or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Scott's face down in a pool, like mob movie style. Only no one checked to see who's actually dead. And
that's why you double tap.
Right. And he has these visions. I'm not even clear if they were real visions or just him like kind of hallucinating, like connecting to Jean, but of Jean as the Phoenix.
I think it was life flashing before your eyes type shit.
And he wakes up to that vision of Jean being Sarah giving him CPR.
Which now, second person who has given CPR to Scott in the show.
And two of them have saved his life and neither was Jean. Directly.
So Scott regains consciousness, and because he doesn't have his glasses on, as his eyes open, he just shoots a giant hole in the house.
And he's surprised that Sarah wasn't shocked by it. And he's like, oh, you knew? I wasn't aware that she didn't know. I just had figured you'd known each other as kids in the time that all this stuff was manifesting. But I guess he was surprised by it. And she was like, yeah, no, and she said what I thought. She's like, yeah, I fucking lived with you literally in the time all this shit was going down. Of course I noticed laser or optic blast eyes coming from somebody,
But before we had that conversation, because his immediate reaction is, did they take the kids with them? Mm-hmm. Sarah didn't see the kids go with them. So he decides to search the house. They realize in the basement that the kids are there. And then there's a really weird quote that I don't think ages well, where it was, acceptance must be earned, not forced on people.
Okay, yeah, well, when he finds the kids.
When he finds the kids and he's like trying to help them break out of their brainwashing. Mm-hmm. I don't like the idea of the quote of acceptance must be earned. I do agree with things should not be forced on people.
Yeah.
But if you have to earn to not be treated in a bigoted manner.
Yeah.
I call bullshit on that one.
Yeah, and also, like, I guess that kind of implies that Kilgrave had a justifiable way of indoctrinating the kids.
Yeah.
That wasn't brainwashing. That's kind of weird, too. Yeah.
Yeah.
It just wasn't thought through.
Yeah, the quote, I know it was meant to be with good intentions of like, we have to show people they don't need to be afraid of us.
Yeah.
But the hatred comes from a bigoted reason.
Yeah.
So I don't agree with, you have to change who you are to make somebody else comfortable if you didn't do anything wrong in the first place.
Yeah. No. Oh, I get what you're saying. Yeah, it's pretty much that of like, the whole argument of like people of color in the workplace and stuff. Not necessarily my specific situation, but a lot of minorities have to be extra extraordinary, exceptional for the same positions.
Right.
Just to be at like a base level, let alone acceptable.
It's inherently bullshit.
Yeah. So that the whole putting in effort just to be accepted. Yeah, that's kind of that. I get what you're saying. Yeah, that age like milk. Was it that way?
Yeah. And again, I don't think there was any negative intention with it. I think it is just one of those phrases that tolerance and acceptance, I think, got confused at some point.
Yeah, well, yeah, me included, like, just at the time, like, learning how to, like, discuss all of that, because the 90s, I bring it up now to kids and I have to check myself. This is like my generation's, like, I have to kind of alter the way I think or talk about subjects. I mentioned like En Vogue had that song Free Your Mind, mm-hmm. Very well intentioned. I still think musically a great song, but it's hairy when they talk about being colorblind. And as a kid, that was like a fight the power kind of thing. And now it's like, not necessarily aging so well, like colorblind isn't exactly the goal. At the time, it was part of the learning curve, I guess.
Right.
Not an excuse necessarily, but just saying it was well intentioned and didn't age too well.
So they get back to the mansion. That's where Sarah and Scott have the, wait, you didn't freak out when and she's like, yeah, I always knew. To your point, I remember the other kid at my orphanage who kept like, shit kept, even if she didn't see the blast go off, shit kept melting.
Yeah.
She figured something out.
And they look like they're about to kiss. I don't know if I interpreted that correctly. They
had a moment.
Yeah.
I don't know if they were going to pull the trigger and actually kiss, but they were definitely having a moment.
Yeah, there was something special going on there. And then cartoon villain Kilgrave arrives in a helicopter with a bullhorn. And
it's not just a helicopter, it's like an attack helicopter. Yeah. Like this is some like Cobra Commander shit.
And he's yelling at them from the helicopter, being super subtle. And a reporter who has ears catches on that this is happening from a car, like somewhere nearby.
Yeah, they show up with a full remote broadcast cameraman and everything.
Yeah.
They're ready to go.
And she says, get your camera ready, let's go. And her and the cameraman catch everything that's happening. Kilgrave makes Rusty set the orphanage on fire, so now we have that going on. So they're literally between an attack helicopter and a fiery place. And then Scott tries to shoot down the helicopter.
Well, at first, Kilgrave is pushing to control Scott, and Scott is trying to get a shot off, and it's kind of the battle of wills scenario. This ends up leading to Scott overcoming it and shoots a hole clean through the center of it, and you see Kilgrave and the amazing Wayne just kind of like plop out on the two different sides of it. But of course, this is like a shitty neighborhood, so there are no actual cops nearby.
Right. So Sarah runs back into the burning building because they realize that Taki's still in there.
Well, she starts to.
She starts to run back in the building because Taki's in there. And Scott has a flashback of not being able to save Jean, and he freaks the fuck out. And so he runs in there to actually do it.
Yeah.
And he's able to blast his way through the fire, once again exhibiting that force thing.
Well, it looks like Scott runs in, and then he is going to get trapped inside there.
Yeah.
And there's like that oh shit moment for Sarah, and then Scott is able to use the force blast to get himself out of there.
So he rescues himself and Taki, and then this whole ordeal, including Kilgrave's confession, airs on the news. In that happy, ending Full House moment, Sarah asks Scott to stay and be part of the orphanage and everything, but Scott says he's so inspired by the events of what happened at the orphanage that he realizes he has a responsibility to the X-Men.
Which I feel like Scott's reaction should be, I can't stay. I literally live in a mansion. Let me see if I could help you subsidize the money you just lost because we found out your main funding was coming from a supervillain.
Yeah, I guess, they didn't wrap that part up, did they?
No, I mean, here's the thing. A lot of these episodes, and I noticed it more in season 2 and 3 than in season 1, they have very quick wrap-ups.
Yeah.
So it was one of those well, there's definitely shit that happened off camera. We're going to assume Scott did the right thing.
So Scott arrives back at the X Mansion just in time in the war room when
there's like a team meeting, so everybody's there.
And Cerebro has like an alert that comes on, and it did an auto scan and discovered that Jean is still alive.
Yeah. And Scott, like you said, walks in at the perfect time. Yeah. He sees it, and I think the last line of the episode is, I miss you.
Yeah.
And that's how we close out the episode. Getting full circle on the whole idea of this was the episode where they were supposed to grieve. And then you get it's Jubilee was right. It's not as bad as we thought it was.
Yeah. So in the original timeline of when we watch these episodes, we just figured they all got over it off camera.
It's just kind of not addressed.
Yeah.
There's no epilogue to it, unfortunately, in the real time of how the broadcast order.
And even though this episode is kind of janky in the technical sense, there was a few animation glitches and stuff, especially with Kilgrave.
It was just a lower quality animation from it being this outsourced team, unfortunately.
Yeah, but overall, at least that opening sequence of them mourning Jean, that made a lot of sense. That was my first reaction. It's okay, here it is. They do miss her.
Yeah, and I don't want to give full context as to what was happening at the time because there's so many episodes I don't remember in detail.
Yeah.
But it's why would there be mourning at that point in time? Because it doesn't make sense, regardless of what is coming, or even if what you don't know is coming.
Yeah.
Just the choice of doing it. Eric Lewald in previously on X-Men that we mentioned earlier is well, I guess that episode when it aired could have been interpreted as a flashback, but it was obviously very less than ideal because there was 32 episodes or something like that from when it was supposed to happen to when it actually did air.
Yeah, it was a year and a half later or something.
About 2 full years.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, so that's everything.
Yeah, it was a pretty open and closed episode besides the orphanage. We don't know what happened to that, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah. I wonder if the episode scored as low as it did, one, because people were watching it out of intended order, so it kind of doesn't make as much sense from a narrative perspective. It did have the lower quality animation. And one other thing that Eric did mention was Purple Man was played too over the top. And I would agree with that because you look at Kilgrave in Jessica Jones and he is over the top, but it's a menacing over the top versus a mustache twirling bad guy over the top.
He's scary in you don't see him for the first 3 or 4 episodes or something.
Yeah, you just get references to him.
Yeah, this one he's just you're waiting for him to tie one of the orphans to a railroad tracks or something.
Exactly. Snidely Whiplash all the way.
So I don't know. I'm glad I watched it. It was cool.
I'm glad you watched it too, because if you didn't, this would be a really awkward episode for us to record, Rod.
Side note, we have a little mascot today. John got me the Wolverine that has the little picture frame of Jean and Scott. It's not torn in half or have a hole in it.
Yet.
Yeah. But it is the right picture.
Yeah.
And I love that it comes with, I wish you can look this up yourself, but it comes with...
You literally have a phone.
Yeah.
With a camera on it, Rod.
Okay, sure. I'll take a picture, and if I remember to in 2 months to post this,
no, we'll do what we normally do, which is the episode goes live. We forget everything we talked about, and then when we listen to the episodes when they go live on that Monday, that's when I get the reminder of, John, you're supposed to look up the image of Awesome Android because Rod has no idea what that is, and post it to Instagram by Friday.
There you go. The guy, he's very poseable. It's really cool. So he has a badass look, but he also They put all the joints in so he could lay on a couch or a bed, I guess. And he has hands to hold the picture frame, which is the best part. His secondary function is sad Wolverine. I love that.
Well, I do love the default face because they gave two heads with it. You have angry one as your second one, but the main one is kind of like that straight-faced Wolverine from the other meme of like him standing there in the foreground as the awkward makeout session is happening behind him. That's the face that there's not like sad Wolverine, but there's this is awkward Wolverine.
Yeah, that's hilarious. So thank you so much, Joe.
Of course.
That's amazing. All right. Thanks for joining us. If you have any thoughts, make sure to drop them in the comments for either the YouTube upload or the official Instagram post for this episode. If you like what you heard, we'd appreciate a rating on the podcast app of your choosing. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and CastBox, and not Facebook Mobile.
The future is now. We will be respected.